As the Sixers begin their championship journey, looking to finally build a true championship winning roster around Joel Embiid, a familiar name has entered the conversation, that being Jimmy Butler. Now, I want to dive into the legitimacy of this, what we know to this point, and why I think a little bit of the Jimmy Butler folklore in Philadelphia is romanticized more than it should be. So let's start off with what we do know. We did get this report coming out here that the Philadelphia 76ers are expected to monitor Jimmy Butler's situation in Miami per Brian Windhorst. So to dive into what exactly is going into Miami, it's a little bit, to simplify it, is Jimmy Butler wants to get paid, and the Heat aren't sure if they're going to pay him. So what we do know is that Jimmy Butler is seeking a max extension from the Miami Heat this summer, and we also know that per David Aldrich here, that Jimmy Butler and era at Miami could be, quote, nearing a tipping point. Quote, there have been murmurings this year that Butler and the Heat may no longer be singing from the same hymnal. Butler famously does things his way, and Miami's organization famously does not brook much to individualism there. So to be perfectly honest, the Butler and Miami relationship has worked far better than I expect to be the case, and this gets to the point about Butler being romanticized, that don't forget the red flags that this guy does carry. That he is a guy with a short lifespan as far as wearing on guys, how he is with other players. It was the exact same way here in Philadelphia. Now, you can go down the list and point to Jimmy Butler being right about just about every situation or altercation that he found himself into. But with the Miami Heat specifically, we all know all about Heat culture. And to an extent, Jimmy Butler is a guy that embodies that more so than anything. But also to an extent, he's still a guy that beats to his own drum. And the Miami Heat are definitely dead set on the organization being bigger than the person in a way that I think not a lot of NBA franchises think to this point. And to dive into what we do know with Jimmy Butler, I do want to talk about these stats. What does he bring on the court? Because that is the $1,000,000 question for what the Sixers need to get over the hump. Now, of course, we've seen him play, but I did want to look at this as a full. Through his career, an 18.3 points per game score, 4.3 assists, 5.3 rebounds. This specific year, coming off with the Miami Heat, averaged 20.8 points per game, 5.0 assists, 5.3 rebounds. Shot a career high from three this year, 41.4% on 2.4 attempts per game. The three-point attempts, the willingness is never going to be to the level that we want. And from a pure fit standpoint, that is concerning to me. That Butler, and while he was here in Philadelphia, went through one of these stretches where he just kind of refuses to shoot three-pointers. Now, for whatever reason, he turns it up in the playoffs again and finds a way to let it fly from beyond the arc. But he's never going to be a guy providing that ideal spacing for Joel Embiid. But what we do know about Jimmy Butler is he is a finisher. And there is a place where that is very much missing on this Sixers team. That so much of this conversation comes off as more of a discredit to Joel Embiid than I mean it to be the case. But I do think that there is a world where the best version for Joel is he's a guy who's the primary contributor for the first three quarters, and then when in crunch time, it's got to be somebody else. Most of that critique is coming purely from the positional standpoint, that I just think there's inherent issues, or it's more difficult in today's modern NBA to play through a big man than it is compared to wing-centric or perimeter-centric players, and Jimmy Butler does fit that category. That we have seen him hit plenty of big shots, but we've also seen him miss plenty of games, and that is exactly the case this year, as this is another season in which Jimmy Butler missed the playoffs. He, of course, did get hurt against the Philadelphia 76ers in that playing game, but he was not able to suit up for any of the first-round games. And I do think the health concern with Jimmy Butler are a bit larger than people are giving him credit. And to dive into some of the games that he has played, played 60 games this year, 64 games the year prior, 57 the year prior, 52, 58, and then 55 back in his season with the Sixers. While those are all, you would take that. That's not like glaring. That's not a guy in danger of playing all 82. And frankly, those numbers, when I looked those up, were a little higher than I anticipated to be the case. That Jimmy Butler is a beat to his own drum guy, that he's not going to suit up on a night in and night out basis. And frankly, I'm surprised to see him get over that 60-game margin. But nonetheless, the conversation for me, and one of the hugest selling points that I have in what I want the Sixers to do this offseason, is find a roster that can keep its head above float when Joel Embiid is not there. That I want a more concrete plan for minimizing his minutes, minimizing the opportunities for him to get hurt, scale back the games played, and have a plan to do that going in, not being reactionary to whatever issues are going with his body. That know that just for starters, he's not playing back-to-back here. He's not traveling and playing in Denver 24 hours after playing Cleveland or whatever the situation may be. For that to work, you have to find players capable of picking up the offensive slack or keeping the Sixers team afloat. I don't think that fits the bill for Jimmy Butler. That I don't think he's a guy that is going to elevate this franchise. We've seen what he's done with the Miami Heat throughout his tenure there. That essentially he plays possum for the regular season and then turns up for a playoff run. And while that's very important, that's not exactly putting these Sixers in the right spot. And I don't want this team to do what they had to do this year, which is battle out of the play-in and play a tougher seed, have a tougher path through the playoffs. Obviously, the Heat have done that with Jimmy Butler to success. We know they went to the NBA Finals last year. But I don't think that is the route for this Sixers team. I would much prefer for them to be swinging down when it comes to those playoff matchups. Now, with Jimmy Butler and the Sixers, I did want to bring up his pastime here because we all remember it quite well. That era, that team specifically, is romanticized far more than should be the case. Now, part of that being that version of Joel Embiid and today's version of Joel Embiid, night and day different. That he's miles better as a basketball player right now than he was during that team. And that is a reason why, I think they cashed in the chips to go all in a bit too soon. But to talk about the Jimmy Butler that took place that season, look at the half a year he spent with the Sixers here. During that season, he averaged 18.2 points, 5.3 rebounds, 4.3 assists, did shoot 37.8% from beyond the three-point arc, 33.8% from beyond the three-point arc. I was looking at the Minnesota stats there. Jimmy Butler was good for this team, but he was not the answer for this team. And when we talk about where things went downhill, the bigger conversation, it was not Tobias Harris over me. It was more of Ben Simmons over me. That there was the fight between Jimmy Butler and Ben Simmons for who should have the ball in crunch time. Because we know that Ben Simmons is essentially useless if he doesn't have the ball in his hands from an offensive standpoint. And by the way, Jimmy Butler absolutely right about all the takes calling Ben soft and all this stuff. That there was a quote that came out after the fact of Jimmy basically questioning, I don't know if Ben Simmons is cut mentally the same way me and Joel are. That aged pretty well looking back. And even if you want to have those conversations about Karl Anthony Towns or some of the other guys that he questioned, Jimmy did end up on the right side of history for a lot of that. And by the way, there has not been any love lost from Joel Embiid and Jimmy Butler. That those two have always been two of the guys that got together pretty much the best of anyone with Joel. That Joel's not a guy with a ton of NBA friends, or at least publicly that he makes known. Jimmy Butler has always been one of these guys. And after the Heat eliminated the Sixers in the playoffs, this being 2 years ago at this point, there was an interesting quote that I did want to bring up here. That Butler came into Philadelphia in Game 6 on Thursday, and he dropped 32 points with 8 rebounds to lead the Heat to the win. That is the guy the Sixers let get away. Thursday really showed why they needed Butler. Quote, I'm happy for him, said Joel Embiid. I won't sit here and say I didn't wish he was my teammate. I still don't know how we let him go. I wish I could have gone to battle with him still, but it is what it is. Just got to keep building and trying to reach that goal. Butler and Embiid have kept their friendship while Butler went off to Miami in the 2019 offseason, but in 3 seasons with the Heat, he has carried this team to the NBA Finals and now the Eastern Conference Finals. Quote, that's my guy, Embiid added. That's my brother. It's tough, but I'm proud of him. He's playing at an unreal level. He's something else right now, and I'm proud of him for being at this level and carrying them in what he's been able to do. Butler even said that he still wishes he was Embiid's teammate. It just wasn't meant to be. Quote, I love him. I'm proud of him. There also was a cool moment dating back to last year before Embiid won MVP, where they asked Butler after a ridiculous performance about should you be MVP or something along those lines, and Butler immediately toned that down and said, nah, that's Joel Embiid this year. He deserves it. Super happy for him, all that kind of thing. There's very clearly a respect and a love between these two that I just straight up don't see for guys regarding Joel Embiid, that he is very much an inner circle guy that sticks to himself. So the fact that he has been outspoken for this dude, I do think carries some weight in this conversation, that I think for the first time in his career that Joel is going to be a part of the archetype of this team of having those conversations with Daryl Morey with what is missing. And it would not surprise me if Jimmy Butler is a guy that he is vouching for. Now, if that is the case, you kind of have to do it, that you kind of have to roll the dice with what Joel says. And I do see a world where this works out, that I do see a world where Jimmy Butler is that closer to a level which, frankly, he was not quite capable of being in that Raptors series, although he still did have the highs in that series for sure. I think there is a point where Joel being a different version of Joel, Jimmy being essentially the same Jimmy, works. That they don't need that guy to have gotten better. If he can just be somewhat of the same, Joel's more capable of carrying him home in a way that was not the case to that point. And that doesn't even bring in the factor of Tyrese Maxey being the voice of youth, being the guy that is still improving, getting better on a year in and year out standpoint. And frankly, even as much as he improved this season, I expect a miles better Tyrese Maxey next year, because that's just how this kid works. So when you talk about that as a big three, it also kind of makes sense that you can see a world where Tyrese Maxey is the combo guard, where Jimmy Butler is also kind of a combo guard, spends some time on ball, spends some time off ball, guards the opposing team's best player, and then Joel Embiid being really still the moneymaker that does most of the damage from a production standpoint, who holds the fort down defensively. You can see a world where that works. And in all of these conversations regarding the star hunting, regarding these big name players these Sixers are trying to bring in, I just also want to make note of it is not complete after one of these guys. That so often the Sixers have been killed with their supporting cast not being good enough, that meaning the guys outside of the stars, that they're not getting enough from the PJ Tuckers of the world, the Tobias Harrises of the world, that you have to round out this roster with those type of guys regardless of what that big fish that they do pull in it. So that is something to note for now. We have to see how things play out in Miami. Jimmy surely is not a guy who makes his feelings unheard when they are there. So I'm sure we would be well aware if there is an issue down in South Beach. But to this point, keep that door open from the Sixers end. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Would you welcome back a Jimmy Butler return? Do you want to run it back in the way that should have been the case that offseason? I want to hear from everybody. Make sure you're dropping a like on this video. Click and subscribe to keep the Sixers Digest family growing. And I will talk with you next time. Peace.